A baby is about to be born. 70,000 BC, fire burning low. And the people sitting around this woman, people who would crawl through fire for her, have absolutely no idea how she got pregnant. Not because they were dumb, because the answer was genuinely invisible to them. And once you understand why, you'll never look at human intelligence the same way again. Here's the thing. Sex happens on a Tuesday. A baby shows up 9 months later. No calendars, no writing, no way to track time. 9 months feels like forever. So those two events, they don't connect. Not even close. It'd be like saying rain causes mushrooms. Both show up after the same thing. But the gap is way too long to see the link. And we have actual proof of this. In the early 1900s, researchers made contact with tribes in Australia that had never once interacted with the outside world. And some of these people, smart, resourceful, surviving in brutal conditions, genuinely did not believe sex caused pregnancy. They thought spirits entered women while they slept near sacred trees. Some believed it was the wind. Others looked up at the moon, swelling full, then shrinking back month after month, and thought, that's it. That's what's doing this. That wasn't stupidity. That was the best available explanation with the information they had. Pattern recognition running at full speed, just missing one critical piece of data. So what finally cracked it open? Not a doctor, not a philosopher, not some ancient genius sitting under a tree. Animals did. These people watched animals the way we watch our phones, constantly, obsessively, because their lives literally depended on it. And animals don't hide anything. Male with a female. Few months later, babies. Watch it happen again. Different animals, different seasons, same result every single time. But the real breakthrough? When people started herding animals around 10,000 years ago, because now they weren't just watching, they were controlling. Put the male with the female, babies. Keep them apart. Nothing. The experiment ran itself every single day until the conclusion was impossible to avoid. Cause, effect, finally connected. But here's what nobody saw coming. Understanding the biology didn't kill the spiritual beliefs. It just moved in right next to them. Because biology answered how. It couldn't touch why. Why this woman? Why this baby? Why right now? That question had no scientific answer, so it stayed exactly where it always lived, in the sacred. And that one unanswered question changed everything about what happened next. The second a group knew a baby was coming, something shifted. Not emotionally, mathematically. Think about what 25 to 50 people actually means. That's not a village. That's barely an extended family. Lose too many, gain too few, and within a single generation, you simply stop existing. So pregnancy wasn't just personal news. It was the group's only shot at a future, walking around inside one person's body. They treated it exactly like that. They even carved for it. The Venus of Willendorf, the Venus of Hohlefels. Small figurines with swollen, pregnant bellies, carved from mammoth ivory at least 35,000 years ago. Not decoration, not art. Objects of raw power made by people who understood that what was growing inside that woman was the most important thing happening anywhere in their world. But they also knew, from painful experience, that it could all disappear in a single night. Ancient burial sites across the world keep telling the same story. Pregnant women buried with unusual care. Extra red ochre, beads, sometimes a tiny infant placed right beside them. Archaeologists read that extra effort as extra grief. Not one death, two, simultaneously. The group felt that difference in their bones, and so they did everything they could to stop it from happening. Here's where the popular image of prehistoric life just completely falls apart. We've been sold this idea of ancient humans as brutal loners. Every person clawing for themselves, survival of the fittest, all day, every day. But the evidence? It says the exact opposite, especially around pregnancy. Pregnant women were pulled off the heaviest work as they got closer to their due date. Not out of kindness, out of cold, hard logic. Lose the mother, you lose the baby. The group cannot absorb that hit. Food got redistributed too. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, people whose way of life gives us a direct window into the ancient past, show pregnant women consistently getting first access to the best food. Meat, fat, the good stuff. Not because anyone understood prenatal nutrition, because they'd noticed across hundreds of generations that well-fed mothers had stronger babies. They paid attention. They adjusted. They remembered. But none of that was the most remarkable thing evolution did to protect a pregnancy. Stop for a second, because this next part genuinely surprised scientists. Human women are one of the only creatures on Earth that live for decades after they can no longer have children. From a pure survival standpoint, that makes zero sense. Evolution is ruthless. It doesn't keep anything alive past its usefulness without a reason. So, what was the reason? Grandmothers. Older women had witnessed more births than anyone else alive. They remembered which plants stopped bleeding. They knew what to do when a baby came out sideways. They carried decades of pattern recognition in their heads that no young mother could possibly have. We didn't keep grandmothers alive just because we loved them. We kept them alive because their knowledge was worth more than almost anything else the group had. The grandmother was humanity's first hospital, and we evolved specifically to keep her open. Some of the medicine she carried wasn't even guesswork. Scientists have since analyzed plants used by ancient and indigenous cultures during labor and found actual pharmacology inside them. Real compounds that reduce pain, real compounds that help the uterus contract properly. These women were running medicine thousands of years before anyone had a word for it. And then there was something even simpler, something you wouldn't expect to matter as much as it did. Stress kills pregnancies, still does. A frightened, anxious pregnant woman has higher levels of cortisol, a hormone that, when it stays elevated too long, actively works against a pregnancy surviving. Ancient people couldn't measure cortisol, but they could see a scared woman. And over generations, they noticed that calm mothers had better outcomes. So they kept pregnant women close, included them, talked to them, touched them, didn't leave them alone. Some researchers believe this is even where music was born. Not for entertainment, as a tool used deliberately around labor, slow rhythmic sound changes your breathing, drops your heart rate, tells your nervous system, which is running threat detection nonstop, that right now, in this moment, you're safe. Bone flutes, found at some of the oldest human sites ever discovered, right next to the midwife knowledge, right next to the careful burials, right next to every other piece of evidence that says these people knew exactly what they were doing. The first song ever sung might have been sung to a woman in labor. Sit with that for a second. Okay, now picture this. The group is moving. Open ground, tracking the seasonal herds they depend on to eat. And somewhere in the middle of that migration, a woman's contractions start. Everything stops. They have no choice. You cannot keep walking when someone needs to give birth. So the group halts, finds whatever cover exists, posts people on watch, and waits. Food stores burn down without any ground being covered. If the land around them is open, every hour standing still is an hour something dangerous could find them. Every single person in that group understood what was happening. One birth had just redirected the fate of everyone. The cost was real. They paid it anyway. And what came next was harder than most people picture. Human birth is far more complicated than in any other animal on Earth. And it's a problem we made for ourselves. About 2 million years ago, human brains started growing at a pace evolution had never seen before. Getting those bigger heads out safely meant babies had to be born earlier, softer, less developed. And the baby has to physically twist and rotate on the way out in a way no other animal does. It's called the obstetric dilemma, and it's the direct reason humans almost always need help during birth, when a chimpanzee can do it completely alone. Every human culture ever studied, ancient Egypt, early Mesopotamia, indigenous cultures on every continent, shows women giving birth upright, squatting, gravity helping, multiple women around them. The midwife wasn't a profession that got invented one day. It was a role that crawled out of biological necessity and never let go. When something went wrong, there was nothing anyone could do. Heavy bleeding, a baby stuck, a baby positioned wrong. In the ancient world, these were almost always fatal, and that fact is physically written into women's bodies. Female pelvic anatomy has been slowly, painfully reshaped across 2 million years of difficult births. Every woman alive today carries in her own skeleton the biological memory of every impossible birth her ancestors somehow survived. Now, the baby arrives. And it is shockingly, almost absurdly helpless. Can't control its own body temperature, skull not fully hardened, can barely see past a few feet, can't move. The human newborn is more physically vulnerable than almost any other newborn on the planet. And again, this is not a flaw. This is the entire point. The human brain is too large to finish developing inside a womb without killing the mother. So it finishes growing outside, shaped by faces and voices and touch and experience, in a way no other animal's brain ever gets to be. The vulnerability is the mechanism. The helplessness is what makes human intelligence possible. It just meant that in 70,000 BC, putting the baby down was simply not an option. So they didn't. Constant skin contact, constant carrying. Nursing around 4 times every single hour, that's documented in modern hunter-gatherer societies today. Not intensive parenting philosophy, a very practical solution to a very specific problem. Because here's the part that stops people cold. A crying baby in open terrain where lions and hyenas hunted by sound alone was a threat to every single person nearby. The infant cry evolved to be impossible to ignore. Loud, piercing, cutting straight through everything. A baby that is never put down almost never needs to use it. The constant holding, the constant nursing, that wasn't just tenderness. That was the group keeping itself alive. And when nothing worked, when a baby was born too sick to survive, or the group faced a situation where they simply could not carry another person through, history records something painful but real. Across nearly every early culture ever studied, there are accounts of infants not surviving those first hours. Sometimes by circumstance, sometimes by choice. Not from cruelty, from the same brutal math that governed everything else in this world. The group carried that weight together, and the love by every measure we have was absolutely real. Now hold on, because this is where everything we've talked about pays off. Scientists can now read ancient human DNA like a book, and what they found inside it is something that should have been impossible to know. How close we came to not existing at all. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in Indonesia erupted with a force 5,000 times greater than Mount St. Helens. Sunlight disappeared, temperatures crashed, entire food chains collapsed almost overnight, and humanity went with them. Almost. Here's the proof that it nearly happened. Every human alive today, all 8 billion of us, has DNA. So similar it's almost eerie. Less genetic diversity than a single troop of chimpanzees living in one forest. Scientists call it a genetic bottleneck. Our entire species shrank down to maybe 10,000 people. A small town. That was it. That was all of us. And what kept those 10,000 people alive had nothing to do with being the strongest or the fastest. It was the grandmothers who remembered which roots were safe to eat when everything else was gone. The midwives working by firelight with nothing but their hands and a few plants. The groups who stopped moving, even on dangerous open ground, because one woman needed them to stop. Here's the thing modern history doesn't tell you. At a time when humans had almost nothing, women weren't treated as less than. They were the ones keeping everyone alive. Their knowledge, their bodies, their endurance. That was the thread the whole species hung from. Somewhere in those years, a woman went into labor. We'll never know her name. We don't know if she was warm or freezing, if the birth was fast or lasted through the night. We only know the baby lived, and in an unbroken chain from that moment, through 74,000 years of hard winters and close calls and songs sung in the dark, that chain reached you. You exist because someone refused to walk away when it mattered most. That's not just history, that's your origin story.